So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. David Chu. He is the president of the Institute for Defense Analyses, and he has been an avid supporter of this workshop over the last 3 years. He was really instrumental in actually making sure that the first one occurred as part of IDA's 60th anniversary. He said, we should do this, we should organize this workshop. And so I cannot thank him enough for his support. Without it, we wouldn't have all the folks here that have the liberty to spend their time organizing this and getting everything together. So thank you, Dr. Chu, and welcome, and thank you for giving some opening remarks.
Laura, thank you, and thanks also to your partner, Heather Whiten, and your entire team for organizing this impressive workshop. It is indeed my pleasure to offer an official welcome on behalf of my institution, the Institute for Defense Analyses, IDA, as well as our partners in this series of sessions, the Director of Operational Test Evaluation of the Department of Defense, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and the American Statistical Association. This is the third annual convocation of this kind. I'm impressed by the enthusiasm shown by your attendance, despite the weather, number of who have turned out, but perhaps even more significant, the extent of contributions offered in both the contributed and poster sessions that will be held later on during the workshop period. Our goal, as I know you appreciate, is a quite simple one, and that is to build a stronger community for rigorous statistical approaches to solving public policy problems, particularly those problems in the test and evaluation regime and across the acquisition spectrum and beyond. And I'd emphasize across the entire acquisition spectrum. A good deal of the debate about testing, as I know you appreciate, focuses on a new end item that is ready for production or in early production stages. And the department is seeking to determine, does it meet the operational objectives for which we set out in the original course plan for that effort? And is it going to be suitable when placed in the hands of troops who will use it? But there's much more to the acquisition spectrum than just that particular element of the trajectory that any program follows. There are, of course, the early tests where you're trying to determine, do we understand the key principles involved in the system development, all the way through the life cycle. I would emphasize especially that later stage. What does it take to operate and support a particular piece of gear? It's the less focused upon part of the acquisition saga. Newspapers tend to focus on early development and all the difficulties that attend thereto. But in fact, if you look at the resource base of the department and where the real issues lie, they arise once the system is deployed or as it moves toward deployment. If you look at the department's budget, for example, 2/3 of the department's budget is in the cost of operating the force every single day, not in the highly controversial development phase of major weapon systems. And in fact, half the budget, just over half the budget, goes simply for the cost of personnel that the department employs to man the forces that use the systems involved. And greater attention to that phase of the acquisition cycle is, I think, one of the interesting methodological and statistical challenges out there, because the department, in my judgment, in my career experience, really does not understand as well as it needs to what drives those results. The inexorable march of increasing operating costs is a hallmark of the department's history throughout the last 40 or 50 years. If you look at the O&M account specifically, which embraces the costs of our civilian personnel and the parts and fuel and other elements necessary to actually field a force, that has been rising inexorably at about 2.5% per year in real terms per active duty person. It's a great challenge to the department in terms of controlling its costs, without which it will not be able to afford the kind of equipment it would like to have for the future. So greater attention by the community to this later stage of the acquisition cycle, I think, is one of the interesting challenges ahead of us. The system methodologies that you are looking at in this workshop, I think, help us answer three basic questions that are essential to the efficient management of the systems with which these institutions are charged for fielding. for usage in support of national objectives. First question, of course, basic question, how much testing is enough? This classic question in all efforts by the cabinet agencies of the United States government, but it applies here likewise. I know that many elements of the acquisition community are dubious about the extent of testing that is required by various regulations. And there are those who believe we could shortcut these tests, do less, field systems more rapidly. Now, I happen to believe that what we discover in tests and the charge of delays incurred as a result of the tests are not the fault of the tests. They are inherent in the equipment that's being tested. That what the tests do is uncover the issues that we need to address as a department. But this is a key issue. This is an issue that unfortunately puts the statistical community in a bit the role of being the black hat of the acquisition cycle. Very much akin to the kind of unfortunate reputation that Dick Cheney earned as vice president in the Bush 43 administration. As you know, he was seen as the dark force behind the president, so much so that when he went to write his memoirs, the Washington Post ran a contest for what the opening lines of the memoir should say. And one wag suggested that his opening line should claim that I do have the heart of a liberal. I keep it in a jar on my desk. To some extent, I fear that is your problem as well, that the acquisition community views you as keeping their systems in a jar on the desk and precluding their prompt deployment. It is an issue I think we must confront with thoughtful, methodological arguments in terms of what is necessary to understand the performance of the system. And that's the second major question. So first issue that I think methodologies you are addressing here in this workshop confronts is this key question, how much testing is enough? Second and related issue is, well, how capable is the system that we are preparing to field? The acquisition community tends to measure that capability against the original objectives. Often those objectives are stated in engineering terms. I'd urge, and I'd certainly seek the partnership of this community in changing the nature of that debate. The real issue is the margin of difference in the capability the new system provides sufficiently compelling relative to what we already have, that it's worth making the switch, worth making the investment in time and money to move to the new approach. And again, I think that's where this community has a great deal to offer to the decision makers of the department. Put differently, rather than finding fault with the systems, which tends to be the way the operational tests are seen by the acquisition community, indeed, I would argue you are creating an agenda for how products need to be improved as time goes on. And I'd like to see, I confess I have had absolutely no success in this endeavor. I'd like to see this community viewed as the source of what amounts to product improvement plans for every single system Department of Defense and other cabinet agencies deploy. It's not a matter of whether it's pass or fail. The issue is, can this be made to be a compelling investment of public resources? On what kinds of changes should the acquisition system focus as it goes forward? The third question I think these methodologies help us answer, which again obviously is related to the first two, is what are the uncertainties and the estimates prepared as a result of the test operation that is undertaken? And there is a tendency in the reports, a tendency in the way the public debate is carried out, to focus on point estimates as if it were a deterministic world. It's not. It's a statistical world, as you as a community appreciate, but which I fear too many do not. And so one of what I see as your key contributions is giving decision makers some sense of how much confidence should they place in these estimates. What range of possibilities is available as a forecasting element in terms of applying these systems to real military or other problems of the federal government, both at the low end, in other words, what could go wrong, what's the worst possible outcome we could achieve in this regime within some reasonable confidence interval, at the other end, what's the best that we could hope for in terms of these systems. Now, a great deal I acknowledge of what I'm really asking you to do is to help in educating decision makers about statistical issues. And lest you think that is an unnecessary objective, I would share with you both a story told apocryphally about statistics and one of my own real-life experiences. The story, of course, is about a student confronted with a true-false examination who knows nothing about the material and decides to flip a coin in order to answer the questions. He completes the exam and then suddenly becomes quite agitated, starts flipping the coin again. And the instructor, who of course ignored this approach to answer the question, asks him, "What's wrong?" And the student answers, "I'm rechecking my answers." And I think that summarizes, I fear, the knowledge statistics in too many quarters of senior responsibility. I had that experience as a young officer in the American forces in Vietnam, and we were quizzing the organizer of convoys. Convoys were subject to ambush in Vietnam, as you may recall, about their plan to randomize the route. And we were asserting we must randomize the routes. And he said, "Oh, yes, yes, we do randomize the route. On even number days, we take route A. On odd number days, we take route B." That is a true story. That is indicative, I fear, of the level of statistical accomplishment, let us put it that way, that has come out of our educational system too frequently. There are many examples, in terms of the questions I posed earlier, where good statistical analysis has brought results that have improved the lives of warfighters. And I'll give you two from IDA's experience of the last 10, 15 years of the long war in which we're engaged. One involves the mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles, MRAPs. As they were being fielded, we were seeing a distressingly high number of disabling casualties, if not deaths. And the statisticians went to work on the data from the field and determined that what they really showed was that the interior configuration of the vehicle was hostile toward the survival of the occupants, notwithstanding the view from an engineering perspective that we thought we knew what we were doing. And using those data, the design of that vehicle was changed in a manner that substantially reduced the injuries and losses to our soldiers. An excellent example of applying data in real time to a compelling problem after what you might have seen as the regular process had been concluded, in part because MRAP was an emergent process. It did not have the safeguards that regular process provides. So that is both an observation on how much testing we need in order to get a reasonably good product fielded, but it's also a good example of understanding how capable is the system, or in this case, how uncapable is the system that we're using and what kind of product improvements must be made. And what's also striking about it, in my judgment, as an historical example, was being done in real time, being done as the system was being deployed. And I'll come back to that point in just a moment or two. The second example I offer is having to do with body armor, especially armored plates that were being used, as well as helmets. And what the testing revealed were some of the defects in the manufacturing process and design of these materials. Again, this was a near real-time effort. What it essentially argued is that much more testing needed to be done if we're going to be sure that the lots being bought were in fact uniform in their effectiveness and would protect soldiers in the way that we intended. Again, an example of tests and the use of statistics to save the lives, to save the limbs, to save the bodies of soldiers, Marines in the field. And I think they both make a compelling case for why this community and its work and why good methodology in that work is indeed so important. Now, your workshops cover a wide range of topics, foundational topics, such as design of experiments, as well as new methods that might be employed. As you know, there's a great deal of excitement these days about machine learning. There's a wide range of views of what machine learning really does give us and how confident we can be in what it offers and how best to apply it. It includes also the question of how to use surveys effectively in this regime. I do hope as you go through those sessions, you think about these overarching questions. How much testing is enough? How good is the system that we are deploying? What are the uncertainties associated with the parameter estimates that are being derived? And as my comments suggest, how do we explain these results and the rigor behind them, the degree of faith we can have in them to decision makers so they can make sound decisions about the department's future? And looking to the future, I would ask you, as you reflect on this workshop, and as you think about what we should cover in future workshops, to think about 3 other questions related to these basic issues I've raised. First of all, how do we use our resources, test resources especially, more efficiently? Which can be translated as how do we make sure people understand why we're doing the tests and how we have to defend the results from those tests, particularly when they yield outcomes that are different from the expectations of those commissioning the program. That is, as you know from your own life experience, one of the hardest situations to confront when they do not reinforce accepted beliefs and when you are there saying the world is not flat or the sky is not blue. And as you also appreciate from your experience, I'm sure there's a certain shoot the messenger response to bulletins like that, and a tendency to want to disbelieve the data, disbelieve the methods. So part of our responsibility is to think about how do we make it certain the tests are fair, and how do we use the test resources in the best way possible in order to get the most information out of the limited opportunity to try things out before they're really fielded. Second, and this relates back to the 2 stories I've told about the IDA examples, the MRAP and armor plate situations, are there ways to facilitate what some now want to call agile development? There's a great deal of enthusiasm for this concept, particularly as it applies to software, but it may apply in other areas as well. The Special Operations Command for some time has used an acquisition philosophy, as I understand it, in which they take an article and put it in the field with operators to understand how they might actually employ the new gear. And we at IDA are exploring with the Army whether that is a way to proceed for its tactical network going forward, given dissatisfaction with results of the network solutions to date. That's a different kind of regime from the way most major defense acquisition programs have been run in the past, in which we have a long development period. We build up to the operational test, and we have this big go, no-go check that we want to make. Instead, we're constantly in the process of looking at what can technology yield for us when put in the hands of operators. It does lead to a situation, this is what, of course, I think military services fear, we would have non-standard items across the entire force. We have lived with that situation as a reality for a long time with the Navy. You look at Navy ships, every ship is different as a practical matter. There are the idiosyncrasies involved there. Could we accept something more like that? And if so, how could this community help us understand what performance looks like, and are we in fact getting better performance as time goes on, or are we stuck on a plateau that is unsatisfying? And finally, I would ask you to think about how we evaluate systems. Come back to my concern with operating support regimes for the department. How do we evaluate systems as they change over time? The F-16 that is deployed today is not the F-16 that was bought in the mid-1970s. It's a very different aircraft. The B-52 that's flying today is not, from an electronic warfare perspective, anything like the B-52 that was originally fielded 40, 50 years ago. The interior has been totally changed, or almost totally changed. Do we have good ways of understanding from the data we can solicit from the employment of these systems how that performance is shifting and how we should best support those systems going forward? And of course, the last entreaty I have in terms of questions on which to reflect concerns this workshop itself. It is our intent, our partners agree that we would hold these workshops on an annual basis. They are, I think, so productive for the department, for the larger federal community. But how can we make this workshop even better and even more satisfying from your vantage point? And I reinforce Dr. Freeman's injunction. We will operate tomorrow regardless, right, Laura? Anyway, thank you very much for being with you, and I wish you the very best in your endeavors the next 2 days.